This is the TrimUI Smart Pro. It's a retro gaming handheld and coming in at around £30 from AliExpress, it's quickly become one of my favourite ways to relive some of those gaming memories from the past. But at such a low price point, just how good is this device? Well, join me as we take a full review of the TrimUI Smart Pro. Hello everybody, my name is Robert and this is Bite Size Club. So yeah, as I say, this thing is dirt cheap right now when you buy it from the right place. Be careful of Amazon resellers, they're basically just drop shipping this thing. Go right to the source, somewhere like AliExpress, where you can pick up the TrimUI for around £30 to £40. There are a few options to buy with an SD card as well, a 64GB or a 128GB card. This is basically just a SD card that's full of ROMs. I don't recommend buying this version, not because I'm against piracy or anything. I own a Retro Handheld. It's more that the ROMs that you're going to get are probably not going to be that great quality, they're probably going to be a lot of knockoffs and just not a great experience. Provide your own ROMs, get your own SD card and you'll have a much better experience overall. When you receive the product inside of the box, you of course do get a little instruction manual giving you an overview of all of the controls, as well as how to flash new firmware if you decide that you want to do that, the device itself and a USB to USB-C cable. Taking a look around the device, the first thing you're going to notice is this thing definitely has some design cues from the PlayStation Portable and PlayStation Vita. That really isn't a bad thing though, because both of those handhelds are incredibly iconic and incredibly comfortable to hold. The TrimUI is exactly the same. It's a little bit on the heavier side, but honestly I didn't mind it too much because it made it feel like a good high quality item. On the front we've got a 4.96 IPS display. Honestly, this display is one of my favourite things about the Smart Pro. It looks absolutely gorgeous and the viewing angles are almost perfect. That is because it's an IPS panel. I've never really come across a handheld with a similar display in terms of just how good it really does look. Along the left hand side you've got the D-pad as well as the left thumbstick and the home button, which is just a really quick way to be able to save and load states as well as exit games and change applications. On the right hand side, you've got your face buttons, as well as another thumb pad and a start and select button. Overall, all of the buttons feel pretty good here. My only real gripe is that the thumbsticks are, one, not able to be clicked in, so you don't have an L3 and an R3. For some emulators, this might be a problem, but I really haven't noticed it too much because I've been emulating consoles that didn't have that functionality anyway. Also, another problem with the thumbsticks is, of course, they are really sitting quite flush with the console. And that means that you don't have a ton of degrees of movement. When you're trying to walk instead of run in games like Super Mario 64, you're going to struggle to find that sweet spot of walking and running. Overall though, the controls feel great, and the little RGB ring around the thumbsticks give it that nice little pop of colour and fun. There isn't actually a way by default in the UI to change the colours of this, but there are some other hacks and applications that will allow you to change it, and we'll talk a little bit about those later. Along the top of the device we've got the triggers as well, so you've got your L1, L2, R1 and R2. You've got your power button. One of the two USB-C ports, one is for host and one is for things like charging and transferring data. We've also got the volume rocker here. Again, these are pretty well placed, I don't really have any gripes with them. Along the bottom, we've got the function key, which can be switched between two states. In the OS, you can decide what this does. For me, I've got it turning on and off the RGB lighting, but you can also set it to turbo when it's in one mode and not turbo in another. This is particularly useful when you're trying to run more intensive consoles like the N64, GameCube and PlayStation 1. As I say, there's another USB-C port here. This one is for charging. There's also a microphone, a place for your micro SD card and a headphone jack. Before we continue with this review though, I do just want to say, if this is the first time that you're seeing my face on your screen, then one, lucky you. And two, go down there, hit that subscribe button, smash that notification bell so you get notified every time I upload. The operating system it's running here is Linux, but not Android, so you can't just go into the App Store and download your emulators and other apps such as Call of Duty Mobile and Genshin Impact. It's not that kind of handheld, and you probably wouldn't want to based upon the specs. It really isn't a powerful handheld, but you really shouldn't expect it to be for around the £30 to £40 mark. I found that it emulates almost all consoles up to around the PlayStation 1 and N64 pretty well. Anything above that, you're going to start to find some issues and you might need to downscale slightly, or maybe even hit that turbo button. All of your emulators are going to work through RetroArch, and when you get the console, there's not going to be any games on it unless you bought one of those SD cards that come with it. The first thing I would suggest though is you just take the contents of that SD card and copy it to a better name brand one, because 9 times out of 10 the ones that come with the console are not great quality and they will break pretty quickly. On their website and GitHub page there is a guide for setting up the micro SD card. It has to be done in a pretty specific way for the emulators to start to work. It was a little bit of a faff setting it up, so I do kind of wish that I had bought one of those SD cards, only because I could have then had a good starting base point, but it really wasn't too much of an issue. Let's talk about the UI, because TrimUI's UI is actually really clever and super useful. On the home screen, there's a way for you to access all your favourites, a few collections, as well as any of the emulators that you might have installed. These will show up in basically their own categories, and then you can also scrape any images, videos, and metadata that you may want to. There are a few fun ports and applications here, but out of the box, it's kind of limited. One of the great things about TrimUI is they really do support the developer community. I've actually flashed a version of the OS called CrossMix. It's super easy to install. I'll leave a guide in the description down below on how to do it. But what that actually does is it gives you a ton of new applications that are actually really useful. Things like accessing the console over SSH so you don't have to keep plugging in your console to your PC every time you want to change a ROM over or put a new one on. There's a way to change the RGB lighting, run a ton of different ports, as well as use a scraper which is built directly onto the console. Just point it at your ROMs and it will do the rest for you. Let's talk a little bit more about that screen though, because it absolutely is stunning. It's running at around 720p, but honestly, with a screen this size, you're probably not going to notice that it's not full HD. The colours are absolutely gorgeous, and it's one of the things that really put me off playing with these kinds of retro handhelds in the past. In the past, I've owned a PowerKitty X18S, and though it was an absolutely incredible console, the screen was pretty poor, and the viewing angles were just atrocious. Colour reproduction was also bad. But that really isn't an issue here, and it's one of the things that I think I love the most about the console. So as I say, running any of your games will all run through RetroArch. So if you already use RetroArch and understand how it works, you'll have a great time here getting everything set up and ready to go. I could do a whole separate video on RetroArch alone. I'm not going to talk too much about it here. We're actually just going to talk about the console and its performance. Primarily, I will play Game Boy, Game Boy Advance, Game Boy Color, and maybe a little bit of PlayStation 1 games. I don't tend to stray too far from those because those are the consoles that I truly grew up with. And this console truly doesn't skip a beat. With the PlayStation 1 games, a few of them do run a little slower than I perhaps would like, but there's a ton of things that you can do in the RetroArch settings to get things running just that little bit better for you. Overall then, the form factor is just absolutely beautiful for this console. It's easy enough that you can pocket it and you don't have to worry too much about having a separate bag. I have run a few retro consoles on the Steam Deck before, but I found it's just simply be too unwieldy to carry around for day-to-day use. I actually took the Smart Pro with me on a trip to London over the weekend, and it made the train journey that much more fun. Being able to just dip in and out of a ton of different retro games in a form factor that just felt nice in the hand. It wasn't too heavy, and it ran basically anything I could throw at it without a hitch. Controls feel super responsive in almost any game that I've thrown at it. Primarily, I will play Game Boy Advance games on this because I feel like it's just a good form factor for it. And I've never had to set up or configure any of the controls. For a lot of the handhelds I've owned in the past, I've had to do a little bit of configuring in terms of making sure that all of the buttons do exactly what you expect them to. You don't need to do that here. When you press that menu button, you can actually save and load your RetroArch states directly from within TrimUI's UI. and it makes it really easy to be able to jump between your save and load states. The speakers are not brilliant here. You do see the grills along the bottom of the device that are facing towards the user, but that's not actually where the speakers are. They're actually on the back of the device. If you were to unscrew it all, it's just basically going to vibrate the back plate. It does mean that any kind of audio that you're going to get out of it without using headphones or Bluetooth devices is not going to be great. But honestly, I really didn't mind too much, because if I was going to be using this thing in public while traveling, which is my main use case for a device like this, I would be using headphones anyway. So there we have it, guys. That has been my review of the TrimUI Smart Pro. It genuinely has become one of my favourite retro handhelds because, one, of that price point, which is just so competitive compared to everything else on the market. 2, its controls. 3, that screen, which again, I'm just going to say is absolutely stunning. And of course 4, its compatibility with Linux and the developer community, which have created some amazing applications and make it really easy to customize this handheld for your liking. It's not perfect though, and I do just wish that those thumbsticks were a little bit better, and I wish that setting up the SD cards was a little bit more simple. I'd like to see a way to be able to just download an application on my Mac or my Windows PC and then just click a button which will format the SD card, set up RetroArch and everything that it needs in one place, rather than me having to copy and paste them, work out which files need to go where on the file structure. It's all just a little bit of a faff. So why don't you guys let me know what you think of the TrimUI Smart Pro in the comments section down below. And of course, while you're down there as well, get subscribed. It genuinely does mean the world to me. Anyway guys, my name's been Robert. This has been Bite Size Clue, and I will catch you in the next one. Adios.